Today I'm interviewing my friend Dushka Zapata. Dushka just wrote another book. It's called How to Draw Your Boundaries and Why No One Else Can Save You. So I'm really excited to hop on a call with her in a moment to go over what this new book is about. I did want to read the very back, just to set some context. A global pandemic and the need to socially distance tested my boundary setting skills. It reminded me that when it comes to setting boundaries, we are all amateurs. I took notes of things I recently learned and collected pieces I've written in the past in an attempt to assemble a book focused on boundaries. Where to start, what they are for, how to express them, how to enforce them, and what they sound like. With that, let's talk to Dushka.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. Okay, so welcome back again to Dushka. For anyone who's been watching my channel for a while now, Dushka has popped in quite a few times now. And if you don't know Dushka, she's an author and a writer, and she just came out with another book. This is her latest book. And so just to kind of kick things off, Dushka, why did you write this book this year?
I think boundaries are very, very interesting because they're so hard. And if you're too rigid, they're not good. And if you're too flexible, they're not good. And you have to sort of get them just right. And I think that they're the main element of learning how to love yourself and stand up for yourself. And I feel like I've been doing a lot of thoughtful introspection on boundaries and research on boundaries. And then the pandemic hit and I felt like I had no idea what I was doing again. I was really struggling. I feel like dealing with a global pandemic just shifted all of everyone's boundaries. I felt I was struggling with the most basic things. And I found myself just having to start over a lot of my definition of boundaries and what I was comfortable with and what I was not comfortable with. And I thought, if I'm struggling with them and I think about them so much, I'm pretty sure other people are too. So I started writing a lot of new essays on boundaries, but also looking back at essays I had written before. And my plan was to have sort of a instruction manual on how to set boundaries that was going to be really short. And then when I counted the pages and collected everything, I was like, I think it's another book. So it came out quickly. Typically, I put out a book every 6 months, a collection of things that I've written over the past 6 months. And this one was a lot faster. It just happened. And it wasn't a big moment of inspiration. It was more I felt like I was scrambling.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember you when we talked about this a bit. You were calling it a guidebook, something you use to really kind of guide them through how to figure out boundaries for themselves, right?
It's how to set boundaries, how they feel, which I think is really key to learning how to set them. Is they make you feel bad, they make you feel selfish, and maybe you're not being a good friend. And I think that is so helpful to know that a good boundary doesn't always feel good. And so I put together sort of here are the steps that you take to set the right boundaries and to recognize when you need a boundary, but also just different questions that I got about, is this a boundary? Is that a boundary? Just redefining and a lot of what do boundaries sound like? How do I move them? How do I shift them? How do I have a conversation about boundaries? So I feel like it's just a book dedicated to that. Very helpful for me to put together. I hope people find this helpful to read as I found it to write.
Yeah, excellent. So you said that this year, the pandemic, it really required you to sort of redefine or re-understand boundaries. So how would you define boundaries now?
Yeah, so a boundary is the limits of me, where I end and another person begins. What that means is that, for example, with a pandemic, if I really want to see you and I love you and you're my friend, I still find myself saying I can't see you in person because I don't feel safe. And I think now we've gotten to understand the virus a little bit better. And so our precautions around the virus are a little bit less rigid than they were in the beginning. But in the beginning, I was isolating, I wasn't going out, that we were on lockdown. Different people had a different sense of safety around the boundaries. And I just decided that I was going to take it really seriously and wasn't going to see people, or, my only interaction with others was through video conference. I found myself really feeling bad about turning people down to see them. And I was like, but this is my safety. So I felt like I had to reevaluate a lot of what I was doing. Anyway, sorry, I completely digressed. Your question, what our boundaries are, the limits of what I'm comfortable with. So if I feel resentment, it feels like you're angry at someone else, but resentment is a very good indication that you have compromised your boundaries. Resentment is you mad at you for not being clear on your boundaries.
So it's not even really that the definition of the word boundary is ever redefined. It's just constantly being redefined as you go through different stages of life or different things that happen in life.
It could be, I know that we typically have sex before we go to bed, and right now I don't feel like having sex, so no to sex. And basically how to navigate the minute by minute, hour by hour this is my body, these are my things that you're comfortable with. And I think being a clear communicator on what you're comfortable with and what you want and what you don't, and not feeling like you have a duty to do something that you don't want to do is part of what it means to set boundaries. And if you are dealing with an entirely different thing, like a global pandemic, and the virus is basically changing the line of where you feel safe and with whom you feel safe, that redefines things. I have a really good friend who's like very extroverted and has seen a lot of people and is doing a lot of traveling. And I love him. And I'm like, I'm willing to see other people, but I'm not willing to see you because I think that you're taking more risks than I'm comfortable with. And so how do you state that without hurting someone's feelings? It's just been a very interesting exercise in, what I'm comfortable doing, how to clearly communicate it, and how to communicate it in a way that doesn't hurt another person's feelings, or that hurts their feelings minimally, as little as possible. And how you don't have to explain your boundaries. Like, you can just say, I don't want to go to the party. You don't need to give like long explanations. You don't owe anyone any explanations. So a lot of things about boundaries that I just found interesting to explore and to reinforce.
Yeah, no, that part's that you just said at the end there is really interesting to me, because something I've thought a lot about too is that when someone asks you a question, just answer that question. Like, you don't need to over explain or like give an answer to something they didn't ask. If they ask to clarify or ask a question back, that would then require you to like, you give some more context, then that would be the time to do it. But if they haven't, then you can just state your boundary or state what you need as is, and that's okay.
Not over explaining yourself has saved me so much energy. Just like the knowledge that I don't have to do that. And I don't mean being rude or cutting or anything like that, but it's just like I'm comfortable. This is my boundary and I don't want to do that. People who are respectful of your boundaries understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking about this just before our call. I don't really feel like I thought much about boundaries until probably over the last few years, definitely this year, but like even just like, more recently in my life. And so I'm wondering, why do you think boundaries are hard? Why don't people think about them?
Yeah, I feel like, well, in my case, I'll speak for myself. I grew up in a family that didn't really understand or reinforce boundaries, so that you don't have anyone to learn them from. And I also feel like, just as a culture, codependency is normal. So we see fairy tales and pop culture and stories in the movies, and we feel like breaking someone's boundaries is a sign of love. Like, we see people saying, no, I don't want to do that, and the guy pushing that boundary. And in movies, that feels really romantic, but in real life, it's a transgression of your boundaries. So I feel like we don't really know what they are because no one is modeling them for us. We have to figure them out on our own. And then making the distinction between a boundary and control. So a boundary is, this is my limit, but control is me telling you what to do. Basically, control is you trying to get another person to do something to accommodate you. And that's not a boundary, that's control. So my boundary is, I have decided that I'm going to go on lockdown and not see a lot of people during this pandemic. Control is, I don't want you to see people during the pandemic because it makes me nervous, and that's control. Also, how do you slice that when the person that you're spending a lot of time with goes to see other people and has an impact on you? So that's also like very interesting to me. So I felt like it was a social experiment on boundaries and how to set them and how to have conversations with people so that you could, navigate this.
It does really come back to the self. And that's why I think your first chapter is about self-love, loving yourself, right?
Yeah, I'm so touched that you are reading my book. Thank you. Thank you. You're like the first chapter and I'm like, oh my God, she's reading it. When you don't know how to set boundaries and you constantly compromise your boundaries to get another person to love you, this is like people pleasing or approval or just simply bending over backwards for the other person without really neglecting yourself. And it's a circle. It's both, it causes self-esteem, poor self-esteem, and it comes from poor self-esteem. So as you learn how to love yourself, the first lesson is to tell the other person, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I think that a really good way to exercise the I can't do that is, all of a sudden I feel like if I do that, my life is at risk. Like, so now it's no longer I'm neglecting myself. Now it's like, oh, this could have a huge impact on my health. I better start getting this right. So that's what I mean by it was such a good experiment.
Yeah, and place to start. So you also have a chapter in the book that's about what do boundaries sound like? And I love that because I can logically think of boundaries, like that makes sense. But then to think of what does a boundary sound like? Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
A boundary sounds like something that you are going to do. It's like your action. Just so you know, I haven't been sleeping well, so I'm going to go to bed earlier. Typically, we stay out late, and I'm just going to start going to bed earlier. So the other person might say, I don't want to go to bed early. To which you might say, I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you that I'm going to go to bed early. Control would be, we're going to go to bed early this week because I've been really tired. And the other guy is like, why should I go to bed early to accommodate you? So it's like, I think we expect other people to accommodate us and our feelings and our emotions and our needs. And you also learn where you end and the other person begins. So you say, this is what I'm going to do. Another boundary might be, we've been dating and I just want you to know that I am not going to see other people. So the other person might say, I'm not ready to stop seeing other people. And you're like, I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you that I'm going to stop seeing other people.
So then the chapter is really about understanding just like what those phrases, those boundary phrases sound like.
Exactly. And what is the difference between that and you attempting to control another person? And controlling another person sounds really evil, but we all do it. Like we all step on that line. We don't know what it sounds like. So it's helpful for me to think, wait a minute, was that something that I was expecting someone else to do for me? Because then that's control and that's not a boundary. I feel it's hard to distinguish. Sometimes I say it and then I have to like stop and think, wait, I think that wasn't phrased right. I have to be careful with how I say it.
Absolutely. Okay, that's really great. Thank you. The last question I wanted to talk to you about, I think, is something we have talked about before, which is navigating boundaries on the internet. We both have somewhat of a social, like online public presence. And so we interact with people on Instagram or on Quora or on YouTube. And it's interesting because we put ourselves out there a lot. People have the opportunity to learn a lot about who we are, our lives, what we care about, how we think, right? But we don't really get that same opportunity to learn about the other people on the other end. So to them, they may feel like they know us really well, but to us, then it's like, we don't. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about boundaries and how they work on the internet?
Yeah, I think that the internet actually has taught me a lot about boundaries as well. So a boundary might be, how much of you do you want to give, right? So for example, you have spoken about Mike, your boyfriend, your relatively new boyfriend, publicly. So if someone started asking you a lot of questions about your relationship with him, you might be like, I'm happy to answer your questions, but up to a point. And these are the questions that I'm actually not comfortable with. So do you feel like you have a right to determine what to answer and what not to answer if you've already put yourself out there? So someone might say, well, you brought him up, you're talking about him. Doesn't that mean that we have the right to ask you anything? And the fact is that you get to decide how much to reveal of your private life and how much not to. So the first rule is since it's your life, you get to decide what to reveal, even when in the past you have already revealed something. So you might say, I have spoken about that in the future and I don't want to do it anymore without an explanation, right? Because it's your life. You get to decide how much of it you want to share. The other is what you're describing, which is if someone reads what I write and I don't know them, but they read what I write, that sometimes creates a false sense of intimacy, which means people are under the impression that they know me. And in a way they do, but in a way they don't. And that means that sometimes they feel like there's a relationship there that for them took place and for me did not. And so how do I navigate that? And then how much time do I want to spend in these interactions when I have a life outside of the internet that I also lead? So all of these things are things that you have to think about and decide how much you want to allow. I think this applies to everyone on social media. Like, you post a status update and how do you want to respond to every comment? Do you want to post a status update and turn your back on it? And I think that we all get to decide. And I think it's like a tricky new territory. It requires some thought.
Yeah, no, that I love how you've broken that down into sort of the different dynamics of it, because I hadn't thought about that first aspect, but it's super true. Like I may share about my relationship, and I don't really talk about relationship stuff all the time. I mostly talk about design and career and life in San Francisco, that kind of stuff. But it does open that dialogue to someone potentially asking me about that.
And you might feel great about it. That's fantastic. And you might not feel comfortable. Another good example, it might depend on the day. Right. Today, I'm super happy to answer 500 comments. And tomorrow, I just don't feel like I have the emotional energy. And the only person who has the right to regulate how much you give is you.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you brought that up too, because I go through that all the time. I kind of go through responding to comments and emails and messages in waves, just because it can be kind of overwhelming. And a lot of times I love doing it because I love connecting with people. But sometimes I just find myself like, I'll need like a week before I kind of dive back in and like getting into it, because I just need some space.
Yeah. And I do want to say, like, I feel so privileged that people are interested in what I write in the first place. Like that it's wonderful to have that opportunity to connect. But the fact that it's wonderful doesn't mean I need to be available to it all the time. And I think that that applies to any of us on social media, but it also applies to any one of us in real life. Like, just to use the pandemic as an example again, I found myself feeling recharged by the lockdown. I felt like closing myself down to social interaction actually felt like a relief. We've talked about me being introverted before, and I just basically started limiting my social interaction a lot more than I ever thought I would. And I just felt like I needed to give myself that. And I'm really lucky. I have a lot of friends and I'm grateful for them. And the fact that sometimes I need time to myself doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the friendships that I have. And we are the only ones who can regulate how much of ourselves we can give so that we are not depleted to the point that we have nothing left to give.
We're always just trying our best.
We're always just trying our best. And also the notion that loving yourself and setting boundaries and saying no is not selfish, it's necessary. And self-care is not a luxury, something you have to do for yourself. And it starts with boundaries.
Dushka, thank you so much. I'm planning to go to the park tomorrow to finish reading your book. I'm very, very excited. Where can people go to buy this book if they want one for themselves?
So that and all books are available on Amazon. And actually, this is a little bit off topic, but I've written 10 books and a lot of people ask me how I do it. So I wrote a little manual called How to Write a Book. I wrote it a while ago, but I'm giving it away from midnight to midnight on Tuesday, November 24th of 2020. So if anybody goes to Amazon, they click on How to Write a Book, they can get it for free on that day.
Awesome. November 24th.
Yes.
Okay. I will make sure to keep that in the description so people can take note of it.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, and enjoy reading the Boundaries book, and let me know if you want to talk about it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So good to see you.
Wonderful to see you. Bye.
That's all for now, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed that interview again with Dushka. If you are not already a subscriber of my channel, I would love for you to be one. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.